There are afternoons that arrive with no agenda and leave you laughing harder than you've laughed in years. It started with a casual meetup, just a few of us from school, the kind of gathering where you expect a polite catch-up and maybe a cup of tea. But the moment we sat down, someone said, "Do you remember what we used to call Mr. Harris?" And that was it. The dam broke. Nicknames came rushing back, half accurate, half invented on the spot. And suddenly, we were all 13 again, doubled over at the table, tears in our eyes, trying to remember who was Beanpole, who was Disaster Dave, and whether anyone had survived high school without a ridiculous label. That afternoon, it turned out memory wasn't about perfect recall. It was about friendship finding its old rhythm. You'd think a man in his 50s would have better things to do on a Saturday afternoon than argue about a nickname from 35 years ago. But there I was, sitting in a cafe that smelled faintly of cinnamon and burnt espresso, and there they were, 5 people I used to know like the back of my hand. And between us, we had at least 6 different versions of the same name. Pickles, Pockets, Pick, Pocket Man, Pickles the Magnificent, and one person swore it was Piccolo, which made no sense whatsoever, because, as far as any of us could remember, no one in our class ever played the flute. Now, you might be wondering how in the world I ended up in that cafe in the first place. I can tell you, it wasn't part of my Saturday plans. If you'd asked me last week, I'd have told you the odds of me meeting up with my old high school friends were about the same as the odds of me running a marathon in flip-flops, uphill, in the snow, with a backpack full of bowling balls, and probably with one of the bowling balls missing just to make it extra inconvenient. It began just after lunch, on one of those days where the weather can't quite make up its mind. The sky had that half-hearted gray look to it, like it was thinking about raining but hadn't fully committed yet. The kind of day where the wind makes a sound in the trees that feels like it's warning you not to make any ambitious plans. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, the steam curling up in lazy little spirals. The mug had a chip in the rim, my favorite mug always does, and I was staring out the window at the bird feeder. A sparrow was having a loud argument with a blue jay over who had the right to the sunflower seeds. The blue jay won, but the sparrow sat on the fence afterward, puffed up and glaring, like it was planning to write a strongly worded letter to management. I'd been contemplating whether I had enough energy to vacuum the living room. After a few moments of deep thought, I decided no. I absolutely did not. In fact, the vacuum and I had a mutual understanding. It wouldn't bother me if I didn't bother it. That's when the phone rang. The landline, which was already suspicious. These days, it only rings for 2 reasons: telemarketers or my Aunt Janet, calling to report that a man in her neighborhood was walking too slowly past her house. I'm not sure what she expects me to do with that information, but she always sounds deeply concerned about it. I picked it up. "Hello?" There was a pause. Then a voice said, "Hey, remember me?" It was Sam. And not just any Sam. That Sam. The one who once tried to roast marshmallows over a Bunsen burner in chemistry class, which, by the way, smells far worse than you'd expect. I laughed. "Of course I remember you. How could I forget?" The truth is, I hadn't thought about Sam in decades, not since we'd run into each other at the grocery store years ago, both pretending we were just visiting town when, in reality, neither of us had ever really left. Sam got right to the point. "We're having a little get-together, some of the old gang, cafe downtown, 2 o'clock. You in?" I considered my options. "I'm busy, but busy doing what? Avoiding the vacuum?" "I'm out of town, but my car was parked in full view of the street, and half the people in town still knew exactly which car I drove." In the end, the only thing left to say was, sure, why not? I hung up and stared at the phone for a full minute. Well, I thought, this is going to be interesting. Getting ready took me all of 5 minutes, partly because I've given up pretending my hair will ever do what I want it to do. It's reached an age where it has its own opinions, and frankly, I respect that. I opened the closet and stared at my options. Option 1, the good sweater. Option 2, the one that hides coffee stains. I went with the coffee-stained sweater. Practical beats fancy every time. Then came the hunt for my wallet. It wasn't on the counter. It wasn't on the dresser. I finally found it in the freezer. Before you judge, the ice cream had been on sale last week, and I must have set my wallet down while reorganizing the rocky road. Still cold, which was a nice bonus. By the time I made it to the front door, I had my keys, my wallet, my phone, and just enough confidence to hope I'd remember everyone's names when I got there. Because here's the thing, I can remember the lyrics to every song that played at prom. But ask me the name of the guy who sat behind me in math class and I'll draw a blank so big you could project a movie onto it. The drive into town felt like a slow-motion trip through a time capsule. I passed the old strip mall where we used to hang out after school. The record store was gone. The pizza place was now a pet grooming salon, which raised questions I wasn't prepared to answer. The frozen yogurt shop was still there, but the sign looked sun-faded enough to suggest the yogurt inside might be from the Reagan administration. Halfway there, I got stuck behind a red pickup driven by a man who seemed to be conserving fuel by never exceeding 15 miles per hour. It didn't bother me. It gave me more time to think about the people I was about to see. Would we still recognize each other? Would they remember my nickname? And if they did, would I want them to? The road into town was one I'd driven 1,000 times, maybe more. It hadn't changed much except that the potholes had grown up, gotten married, and had pothole children. I passed the old gas station where we used to buy soda and beef jerky on the way to football games. It was now a boutique juice bar, whatever that means. The sign out front said, "Cold-pressed kale and ginger shot, $6. In high school, you could have bought enough gas to drive to the next county for that kind of money, and no one in their right mind would have paid to drink kale. A little further down was the park where we'd played baseball until the lights came on. The bleachers looked the same, though the paint was peeling a little. I slowed down, just for a moment, and remembered the summer Billy Mason slid into second base so hard he tore a hole clean through his jeans. His mother had made him finish the game anyway, and she patched the jeans with a piece of fabric that had cartoon ducks on it. Billy claimed it was lucky, but we all knew better. No one who had to run around in duck-patched jeans was feeling lucky. By the time I reached Main Street, my mind was halfway back in the 1980s. The hardware store still had the same hand-painted sign. The movie theater was closed, but the marquee still had the letters "Coming Soon" on it, which I thought was either wishful thinking or a very slow-moving production schedule. I parked 2 blocks away from the cafe, partly to stretch my legs, partly because parallel parking is not a skill I have any desire to demonstrate in public. The air smelled faintly of rain and cinnamon, probably from the bakery down the street. There was a light breeze, the kind that makes you zip your jacket halfway, but not all the way, because you're trying to convince yourself it's still warm enough to go without. Walking those 2 blocks gave me more time to think about the old gang. Sam, obviously. Then there was Pete, who, if memory served, once tried to build a working go-kart out of an old lawnmower and 3 skateboard wheels. And Denise, who could run faster than anyone in our school but refused to join the track team because, as she put it, they don't let you eat nachos while you run. Then there was the mysterious case of pickles, or pockets, depending on who you asked. I could already feel the arguments brewing. The cafe came into view, one of those places with brick walls, big windows, and a chalkboard menu outside listing items like artisan avocado toast and seasonal chai. Inside, I could see them through the glass. They looked older, of course, but in the same way, a favorite leather jacket looks older, broken in, comfortable, dependable. The kind of faces you could still recognize across a crowded room, even if that room happened to be 35 years away from the last time you saw them. Sam spotted me first. His grin was exactly the same. Wide, a little mischievous, like he just remembered something he wasn't supposed to tell. He waved me over, standing up so fast his chair made that scraping sound that turns every head in a cafe. "Hey, there's Coach!" he called. I froze mid-step. Coach? That was not my nickname in high school. Not even close. And right then, I knew I was in for one of those afternoons where the truth would get tangled up in memories, and the memories would get tangled up in laughter, and no one would be entirely sure by the end what really happened. I reached the table, and the greetings started flying. Handshakes, half hugs, the awkward shoulder pats men do when they're trying to be friendly but not too friendly. Denise gave me the once-over and said, "You look exactly the same," which, I knew, was both a lie and the highest compliment anyone could give at our age. Pete leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "So, do you remember your nickname?" I smiled, took a seat, and said, "I remember a nickname. Whether it was mine or not, I guess we'll find out." And with that, the afternoon began. We'd barely settled into our chairs before Sam slapped the table and said, "All right, let's start easy. Who remembers blisters?" The reaction was immediate. 4 of us said, "Of course," at the same time, and Pete shook his head with a grin. "You know why we called him that, right?" he said, looking around the table like a teacher waiting for the class to answer. Sam leaned in, already laughing. "Because he always showed up after the work was done." Everyone groaned, not because it wasn't funny, but because it was still true. Blisters, whose real name was Alan, had a supernatural ability to appear only after the heavy lifting was over. School dances? He'd walk in just after the chairs were stacked. Yard work for a fundraiser? He'd wander by when the last rake was put away. Even in class projects, he'd find a way to join the group right as the glue was drying. Pete started telling the story of the great gym floor cleanup of '88 when the principal decided the basketball court needed to be scrubbed by hand. Dozens of us were down on our knees, scrubbing away with brushes and buckets of soapy water. 2 hours in, Blisters strolled in wearing sunglasses and carrying a Slurpee. He looked around, nodded, and said, "Wow, looks like you guys have this under control." And then he sat on the bleachers, sipping his drink like he was supervising. Denise nearly choked on her coffee, laughing. I'll never forget when he helped with the homecoming float. Remember that? Of course we did. The theme was Under the Sea, and everyone else had been working for days, covering the float in blue crepe paper and tissue flowers. Blisters showed up on the morning of the parade with a single, slightly deflated beach ball and declared, "Here's my contribution." We all sat back, smiling at the memory. It was the kind of harmless mischief you could laugh about decades later, because everyone had known him well enough to expect it. That was the thing about high school. You could get away with a lot if you did it with a grin, and no one actually got hurt. "All right," said Denise, tapping her mug. "Next one's easy. Who remembers radar?" This one took a little longer, but then Sam's eyes lit up. "Oh yeah, Tommy." Now, Tommy earned the name Radar because he could hear a teacher coming from halfway down the hall. Didn't matter how quiet they were, he'd just tilt his head, squint a little, and say, "Pop quiz," or "Principals on the move," or "Hide the cards." And he was always right. I told the story of the time a bunch of us were playing poker in the back corner of the library, using Skittles as chips, when Radar suddenly whispered, "3 seconds." We barely had time to sweep the cards and candy into our backpacks before Mr. Connors appeared, doing his usual walkthrough. We must have looked guilty as sin, but he didn't find a thing. Radar just sat there, flipping through a math book he had absolutely no intention of reading. Pete added his own memory, a winter morning when Radar announced snow day, before anyone had heard the announcement. Sure enough, 5 minutes later, the PA crackled with the news that school was closed. "Lucky guess," Pete had said back then, but Tommy just smiled in that quiet, satisfied way of his. Sam grinned. Okay, let's go for a tricky one. Who remembers Sticks?" I groaned. "Sticks was Pete," I said, pointing across the table. Pete threw his hands up. "I didn't pick it." Sticks, as it turned out, had nothing to do with music, though for years people assumed he was a drummer. It came from the fact that Pete was built like a bundle of broom handles in high school, all elbows and knees, tall and thin enough that you could lose him behind a flagpole if you weren't paying attention. Denise told the story of the time Pete volunteered to play a tree in the school play. The director had been looking for someone who could stand perfectly still for long periods, and Pete fit the bill. His big moment came when another character was supposed to lean against the tree during a dramatic monologue. The poor guy leaned a little too hard, and both he and Pete went crashing to the floor. The audience thought it was a comedy bit. It wasn't. Pete laughed, shaking his head. "You know, I still can't stand in one place without people trying to hang a coat on me." Sam leaned back in his chair, the way someone does when they know they're about to stir up trouble. "All right, this one's going to divide the room. Who remembers 2 scoops?" The table erupted in half groans, half laughs. Pete slapped his forehead. "Oh man, yeah, Jimmy Carlisle." Now, Jimmy wasn't called 2 scoops because of ice cream. That would have made sense. No, Jimmy got his name because of the way he told stories. He couldn't just give you the basic facts. He had to pile on extra details like he was shoveling cereal into a bowl. 2 scoops. Always. Denise jumped in. Like the time he said he got a flat tire on the way to school, but by the time he finished telling it, there had been a herd of runaway goats, 3 hitchhikers, and a thunderstorm. We all laughed, because it was true, and because no one had ever managed to get to the end of one of Jimmy's stories without wondering how much of it was real. The man could turn "I went to the store" into a full 30-minute performance, complete with sound effects and impersonations. I remembered one particular day in the cafeteria when Jimmy tried to explain why he was late to lunch. The story started with his alarm clock not going off, then somehow veered into his neighbor's parrot escaping, a police chase, and a cameo appearance by someone who may or may not have been Hulk Hogan. By the time he wrapped it up, half the lunch period was gone, and no one remembered what the original question had been. Sam nodded. "I ran into him a couple of years ago. Guess what? He's a motivational speaker now." We all burst out laughing. Of course he was. If anyone could keep an audience hooked on a Tuesday afternoon in a Holiday Inn conference room, it was Jimmy 2 Scoops Carlisle. Denise sipped her coffee, then said, "Okay, I've got one." Clipboard. Remember him? I snorted into my mug. How could we forget? Clipboard was actually Mark Reynolds, who had a thing about writing everything down. Not just homework assignments. Everything. If you asked him what time it was, he'd tell you and then jot it down in a little spiral notebook, like it might be important later. Pete chuckled. I still remember him at the pep rally, taking notes on the cheerleaders' routine like he was going to file a report. Sam added, "My favorite was when he kept score during a dodgeball game, even though he wasn't playing. He stood on the sideline with his notebook, shouting, 'That's 3 outs for the red team, 2 for the blue,' like he was the official referee." The nickname Clipboard stuck after a particularly rainy field trip to the zoo. Everyone else was trying to huddle under the awning to stay dry, but Mark was out in the drizzle, notebook in hand, documenting the feeding times of every animal. Didn't matter that his notes looked like a smeared Rorschach test by the end. He claimed it was for historical accuracy. I laughed. Last I heard, he's a project manager for some tech company. Probably still has that notebook too. Pete rubbed his hands together. "All right, this one's for the veterans. Who remembers Fire Drill Freddy?" The name alone was enough to make Denise nearly spit out her coffee. Oh my gosh, yes. Freddy was famous for one thing, triggering fire drills. Not on purpose, mind you. He just had a gift for being in the wrong place at the wrong time, usually with something electrical. I told the story of the day Freddy tried to make popcorn in the teacher's lounge microwave. First, he put the bag in upside down. Second, he set it for 20 minutes instead of 2. By the time someone noticed, smoke was curling out of the door, and the whole school had to evacuate. And it wasn't the first time. Sam reminded us of the incident with the chemistry lab's Bunsen burners. Freddy had been leaning too close to one while working on a project, and suddenly the sleeve of his sweater started smoldering. He was fine, just startled, but the fire alarm went off, and once again, the entire student body was standing outside in the cold, glaring at him. Pete shook his head. He must have cost the school half a year's budget in false alarms. Sam glanced around the table like he was making sure the coast was clear. "All right, who remembers the Phantom?" A hush fell over the group, followed by the kind of slow grins that come with a shared secret. The Phantom was legendary. And the funny thing was, none of us were entirely sure who he was. Someone, sometime during sophomore year, had started rearranging things in classrooms late at night. A chair would be upside down on a desk. A globe would be in the hallway. Once, every clock in the building was set exactly 23 minutes fast. The teachers blamed vandals. We knew better. The Phantom never broke anything, just caused harmless confusion. Denise swore it was Mike Sweeney. Pete thought it was Tina Harper. I had my own theory, but it was more fun to keep it to myself. Even now, after all these years, no one's confessed. And maybe that's the magic of it. Some stories are better left unsolved. Sam slapped the table again. Okay, next one. Who remembers Left Turn Larry? The entire table cracked up. Even the couple at the next booth glanced over, probably wondering what was so funny about turning left. Larry got his nickname during driver's ed. The poor guy had one flaw behind the wheel. He could not, for the life of him, make a proper left turn. Too wide, too sharp, sometimes even halfway into the wrong lane. If you rode with him, you spent the whole drive clutching the door handle, whispering silent prayers. Pete leaned forward. Remember the time he took us to Burger King? 3 left turns later, we ended up in the grocery store parking lot. Denise was laughing so hard she had tears in her eyes. Oh, and that time at the homecoming parade. He was driving the convertible with the homecoming queen in it. Supposed to take a left down Main Street, he went straight instead, right into the gas station. The poor queen had to wave to people pumping gas. I remembered how Larry would argue that he was improving. He claimed each bad left turn was just data for the next one. To his credit, he eventually did get his license. None of us ever figured out how. Sam leaned back, grinning. Last I heard, he's a Uber driver. Can you imagine? We all groaned in unison, but but it was the kind of groan that melted into laughter. Denise took her turn. All right, what about beans? Ah, yes, beans. That one was as straightforward as nicknames get. Kenny loved baked beans. Loved them. Lunchroom, beans, cookout, beans, school trip to Washington, D.C. He came back with a souvenir can of beans from a roadside stand. Pete added, he even drew beans in the margins of his notebooks, little doodles with faces. The pinnacle, though, was the 8th grade science fair. Kenny's big project was a bean-powered battery. He swore you could generate electricity by wiring a light bulb to a can of beans. It worked for about 4 seconds, long enough for the judges to applaud, and then the whole contraption tipped over, spilling beans all over the gym floor. Sam was wiping his eyes. Didn't the janitor say he was still finding beans months later? I nodded. Under the bleachers, in the vents, one even turned up in the lost and found box. To this day, if someone mentions beans at a cookout, I can still hear Kenny explaining voltage with a straight face. Pete drummed his fingers on the table. Okay, who remembers mailbox? We all groaned in sympathy before we even started laughing. Mailbox was Charlie Henderson. The name came from one disastrous evening involving his bicycle and, well, a mailbox. He was riding down Maple Street showing off for a group of us when he took his eyes off the road for about 2 seconds too long. Bam! Head first into Mrs. O'Malley's big steel mailbox, the thing barely dented. Charlie, on the other hand, walked away with a lump on his forehead and a brand new nickname. Denise added. And after that, every time he got into trouble, people would say, better watch out or you'll hit another mailbox. I chuckled. Didn't he even get a mailbox cake for his 16th birthday? White frosting, red flag on the side, the whole deal. Charlie laughed about it eventually. He had no choice. Once a nickname sticks that hard, you either embrace it or move to another state. Sam pointed across the table. All right, this one's a classic. Who remembers Jukebox Joey? Everyone did. Joey had a gift. He could sing the first line of just about any song on the radio. Didn't matter if it was country, rock, disco, or the weird synth-pop stuff our teachers hated. If you shouted out a title, Joey would belt out the opening line in perfect pitch. The problem was, that's all he knew. One line, never more. It was like his brain was wired to store musical beginnings and nothing else. Denise clapped her hands. Remember the talent show? He tried to do a full song, got through the first line of Don't Stop Believin', and then just stood there smiling. Pete added, and the crowd sang the rest for him. That was the loudest sing-along in school history. Even now, just thinking about it made me grin. Joey wasn't embarrassed, not one bit. He bowed like it had all been planned. Sam chuckled. You know what? I saw him at a wedding a few years back. DJ called him up to sing. Same thing. One line, big smile, everyone else finished it. He hasn't changed a bit. Denise leaned in, lowering her voice just enough to make us all follow suit. What about the Colonel? A ripple of laughter ran around the bureau table. The Colonel was Dave McAllister. He got the nickname in ROTC, where he took the whole thing just a little too seriously. Shiny shoes, perfect salute, and he carried himself like he was already in charge of the Pentagon. Pete said, didn't he once try to march us to lunch in formation? Oh yeah, I said. Left, right, left, straight into the cafeteria doors. Sam laughed, and the way he'd call people by their last names, even in gym class. Johnson, pass me the ball. Nobody else did that. But the truth was, the Colonel wasn't mean about it. He was just earnest. So earnest, in fact, that when the marching band needed someone to carry the flag at halftime, he volunteered. And of course, he marched in with all the solemn dignity of a full military parade. Meanwhile, the rest of us were trying not to laugh as the tuba player tripped behind him. Denise shook her head, smiling. I'll give him this, though. He ended up in the real army. Career officer. So maybe he was on to something all along. Pete raised a finger. One more before I refill my coffee. Who remembers Flip-Flop? That one drew instant laughter because Flip-Flop was Cheryl, and she earned the name for 2 reasons. 1, she wore flip-flops year-round. Didn't matter if it was January and snowing, she'd be shuffling through the halls with bright pink flip-flops on her feet. 2, she changed her mind about everything, constantly. Sam said, she once broke up with her boyfriend 3 times in one afternoon, got back together with him twice before dinner. I added, and she couldn't choose a major in college. She went through, 5 of them? Psychology, art, business, nursing, and then back to psychology. Denise shook her head, grinning. She still does it. Ran into her at Target last year. Spent 20 minutes deciding between 2 laundry detergents. Left without buying either. We all laughed, not unkindly. That was the thing about these nicknames. They were silly, sure, but they carried a kind of affection too. We weren't making fun of people. We were remembering them the way they really were. Sam leaned back, lacing his fingers behind his head. Okay, here's one we can't skip. Who remembers Pockets? The table erupted in laughter before he even explained. Pockets was Eddie Kramer. He had more pockets than any human needed. Cargo pants before cargo pants were cool. A fishing vest with at least 12 compartments. Once he even sewed extra pockets onto his gym shorts. Denise grinned. And every pocket was full of something. Gum, rubber bands, playing cards, batteries. I swear he carried half a hardware store around. I chuckled. One time in math class, he pulled a sandwich out of his vest. A full sandwich, wrapped in foil, like a magician. Pete shook his head, smiling. Remember the field trip to the zoo? He handed out trail mix to everyone. Said he'd packed enough for emergencies. Who does that in 8th grade? The nickname stuck because anytime you forgot something, a pencil, a Band-Aid, even a shoelace, Eddie would reach into a pocket and produce it like Mary Poppins. Come to think of it, I'm not sure Eddie ever really grew out of it. Last I heard, he was a park ranger. Probably still has snacks hidden in every pocket. Denise tapped the table, eyes gleaming. Okay, what about Banana? Ah, Banana. That was Rita. She earned it in gym class after tripping on the running track and skidding like someone had tossed a banana peel under her. The nickname would have faded, but then she leaned into it. Banana keychain. Banana stickers on her notebooks. Even a yellow sweater she wore twice a week. Sam laughed. Didn't she bring a banana to lunch every single day? Like, religiously? Oh yeah, I said. And she had this whole theory that bananas were the perfect food. She could quote potassium levels like a scientist. Pete added, she even did her health class project on bananas. 10 minutes of slides. I think one of them was just a banana with sunglasses. Denise grinned. And let's not forget the pep rally. She showed up in a full banana costume. The crowd went wild. Banana was silly, sure, but it fit her. Cheerful, bright, a little slippery at times. I can still picture her laughing harder than anyone when people shouted the nickname across the hall. Pete tapped his coffee cup. Here's one. Cheeseburger Bill. We all groaned, then chuckled. Bill had one thing on his mind at lunch. Cheeseburgers. Not pizza, not tacos, not the mystery meatloaf. Just cheeseburgers. Sam leaned forward. Didn't he once eat 4 of them in a single sitting? I nodded, and he made it a point to rank every cheeseburger in town. The diner, the bowling alley, the drive-in. He kept a little notebook of ratings, buns, cheese melt, ketchup distribution. Like a food critic in training. Denise giggled. The cafeteria ladies knew him so well. They'd see him coming and just slide a tray his way. And of course, when the yearbook came out, his candid photo showed him mid-bite, grinning with a cheeseburger like it was an award. Bill didn't mind. He owned that nickname proudly. Sam chuckled, eyes sparkling. Okay, who remembers Slinky? Slinky was Marie. She had this habit of falling downstairs. Not in a dangerous way, thank goodness, just frequently. And somehow she always bounced back up, smiling like nothing happened. Pete said, "She tripped down the auditorium stairs during rehearsal." Stood up, bowed, and said, "Thank you, thank you." Whole room applauded. I added, and then at prom she made a dramatic entrance by missing the last 3 steps. Landed perfectly, though, like she planned it. Denise shook her head, grinning. Her parents must have aged 10 years every time she left the house. The nickname Slinky stuck because, like the toy, she just kept going, tumbling along, never broken. It sounds mean when you say it out loud, but Marie loved it. She even signed one of my yearbooks, "Stay Bouncy" from Slinky. Denise raised her hand like she was in class. All right, I've got one. The map. We burst out laughing. The map was Harold, the kid who always knew exactly where we were. You could drop him in a strange town, and within minutes he'd be giving directions like a GPS, long before phones did it for us. Pete said, "Remember the trip to Chicago?" The adults got turned around, and Harold had us back on track in 10 minutes. He was 13. Sam chuckled. He carried atlases around like comic books. He'd sit there studying them during study hall. "Who does that?" I grinned. And when we got our licenses, guess who made laminated maps of every back road in the county? Handed them out like Christmas presents. Denise sipped her coffee. Honestly, I think he was just born to do it. Last I heard, he was a cartographer. Who even becomes a cartographer anymore? We all nodded. Some nicknames were jokes. Some were prophecies. Pete leaned forward, smirking. Okay, this one's almost too good. Who remembers Socks? The laughter was immediate. Socks was Donna. She wore the wildest socks anyone had ever seen. Neon stripes, polka dots, cartoon characters. One day she showed up with socks that had tiny bells on them. The teachers pretended to hate it, but we all knew they secretly loved the chaos. Sam added, "She never matched them either. Left sock, right sock, totally different. Said life was too short for matching." I remembered one school assembly where Donna rolled up her pant legs just to show off glow-in-the-dark socks. Half the gym cheered. Denise laughed. She even decorated her locker with sock drawings. Honestly, I think she started the whole crazy sock trend. Pete nodded. Yep, and at graduation, she wore socks with little caps and gowns on them. I'll never forget that. By now, the coffee cups were mostly empty, but the stories kept coming. Each nickname was a time machine, pulling us back to those hallways, classrooms, and football fields. And the more we remembered, the more we laughed. The diner noise blurred into background hum. The waitress refilled our cups without asking, smiling at the spectacle of grown adults doubled over with laughter about beans, bananas, and socks. I sat back for a moment, just listening to my friends. The warmth of it all settled in, like a blanket on a chilly night. We weren't just remembering silly nicknames. We were remembering ourselves. Sam set his cup down and squinted at the ceiling, as if the answer to his memory was written up there between the diner's water stains and the flickering light bulb. Wait, I've got one. What about tuba? The table groaned and then cracked up almost in unison. Tuba was Larry Johnson. Not because he played the tuba particularly well, he didn't. In fact, he was terrible. But because he insisted on carrying that enormous brass beast everywhere like it was his destiny. Pete chuckled. He tried to bring it on the bus once. Remember that? Wouldn't fit down the aisle. He got stuck halfway. I shook my head. And the driver just kept yelling, "Pick a seat, kid." While poor Larry was wedged between row 3 and row 4 with this giant instrument, Denise leaned forward, laughing. Didn't he also take it to football games? He wasn't in the marching band, but he'd show up in the stands and just blare out 2 notes. Sam grinned. 2 notes, always the same 2. Sounded like a foghorn. It was true. He never really learned the scales. But Larry had heart. Big, booming, brass-plated heart, and that was enough for us to call him Tuba forever. Denise tapped her finger on the table. All right, but what about clipboard Connie? That one sent us into softer laughter, the kind that comes with affectionate memories. Connie was organized, too organized. She had a clipboard for everything. I said, class projects, bake sales, field trips. She had sign-up sheets ready before the teacher even asked. Pete smirked. She once made us all fill out a survey on who should sit where during the bus ride, with little check boxes. Sam added, and she carried spare pencils clipped to it like she was a one-woman office supply store. Denise chuckled. Didn't she even try to take attendance during lunch one time? Sat there with her clipboard, ticking boxes. We all laughed again. Some people were born to improvise. Connie was born to organize. Last I heard, she was running an event planning company. Probably has a gold-plated clipboard by now. Pete leaned back, eyes twinkling. Speaking of props, remember Yo-Yo? Oh yes, Yo-Yo was Timmy Carter. He discovered yo-yos in 6th grade and never put one down again. Walk the dog, around the world, rock the baby. His repertoire was endless. Sam nodded. He tried to yo-yo during a spelling test once. The teacher took it away. He pulled another one out of his desk like he had backups. I laughed. He always had 3. 1 in each pocket, 1 in his backpack. Said you never know when the yo-yo mood might strike. Denise grinned. And he entered the talent show 3 years in a row. Yo-yo act every time. Honestly, by the 3rd year, we were impressed he could still find new tricks. Pete chuckled. Do you remember the prom? He brought a yo-yo in his tuxedo pocket, spent half the night teaching people tricks. Yo-yo never got old for us. Some kids collected baseball cards. Timmy collected gravity-defying moments on a string. Sam snapped his fingers. Oh, I've got a good one. Chalkboard Charlie. We all smiled at the memory. Charlie was the kid who couldn't resist doodling on chalkboards, every class, every subject. If the teacher left the room for 2 minutes, Charlie was up there, sketching cartoons or silly stick figures. Denise said, and it wasn't just doodles. He wrote fake announcements once, remember? Principal says free pizza for everyone. Half the school believed it, Pete laughed. Or when he drew mustaches on all the historical figures during history class. Washington, Lincoln, Roosevelt, every single one had a curly mustache. I added, and the teachers got so tired of erasing, they started assigning him to washboards after school. Didn't slow him down, just gave him a bigger canvas. Chalkboard Charlie turned every classroom into his own gallery. I guess it made sense he ended up as an art teacher. Probably still can't resist a blank board. Denise tilted her head thoughtfully. How about moon boots? We burst into laughter again. Moon boots was Gary. The kid wore those oversized snow boots year-round, even in spring. even in gym class if he could get away with it. Sam said he swore they were comfortable, said regular shoes pinched his feet, but those boots squeaked on the linoleum. You could hear him coming a mile away. I chuckled. Remember the science fair? He wore them with a suit. The judges tried not to laugh. Pete added, and at the roller rink party, he actually skated in them. Couldn't bend his ankles, so he just sort of glided stiffly, like Frankenstein on wheels. Denise wiped her eyes. Honestly, though, he looked happy. Like moon boots were his whole personality. And in a way, they were. By now, the list was growing. Beans, banana, cheeseburger Bill, Slinky, the map, socks, tuba, clipboard Connie, yo-yo, chalkboard Charlie, moon boots. Each name brought a wave of laughter, a small flood of memory, and the kind of warmth that lingers long after the punchline. We weren't just cataloging old friends. We were building a quilt of nicknames, every patch bright, silly, and stitched with a story. The waitress drifted by again, topping off our mugs. She gave us a curious smile. "You folks sure sound like you're having fun," she said. Sam grinned. "We're remembering who we used to be." She nodded like she understood, then moved on. And I thought to myself, maybe that was the real magic of nicknames. They weren't just words, they were bookmarks. Little reminders of the chapters we'd once lived, and we weren't done flipping through the book yet. Pete rubbed his chin and leaned back, looking at the ceiling like he was flipping through an old mental yearbook. "What about Lightning Louie?" That one got a laugh before anyone even said why. Sam chuckled. "Fastest kid on the team, at least in his own imagination." Denise grinned. "He couldn't run a straight line to save his life, always zigzagging, like he was dodging invisible defenders." I added, "And yet, he bragged about his speed so much that we all just called him Lightning." Truth was, he was probably the third slowest. Pete laughed. He once timed himself sprinting from the locker room to the vending machine. Announced he broke a record. Trouble was, the vending machine was out of order, so he had to sprint back empty-handed. We all chuckled. Lightning Louie. More thunder than Flash, but unforgettable. Denise tapped her spoon on her saucer. "All right, but do you remember Gravy? Now there's a name." The table erupted. Gravy was Brian McIntyre. Sam explained he put gravy on everything. Turkey, mashed potatoes, pizza, even spaghetti. I said, "He once brought a thermos full of gravy to lunch. Just gravy. No food, just a drinkable serving." Pete nodded. "And didn't he try to make gravy in chemistry class once? Used the Bunsen burner, nearly set the lab on fire." Denise laughed. "He said gravy was the most important food group." Maybe he wasn't wrong. We all shook our heads, smiling. Some nicknames you didn't need to explain. You just had to say gravy, and everyone knew. Sam leaned forward with a mischievous grin. "Here's one. Chairman." That brought a chorus of groans and laughs. Chairman was Eddie, who never sat in a chair the normal way. I explained he'd lean back so far we thought he'd break his neck, or he'd spin around backward and straddle it like a cowboy. Pete chuckled. He even tried to sit on the top of the chair once, balanced on it like a circus act, fell right into the bookshelf. Denise shook her head. Teachers hated it. Every class they'd say, "Eddie, sit properly," and he'd just grin. He couldn't do it. Sam smirked. That's why we called him Chairman. He treated every chair like it was a new invention. Denise put her hands together. "Okay, how about Fudge? Remember him?" We groaned in nostalgia. Fudge was Mike Reynolds. I said, "He worked at the candy store. Always smelled like chocolate." Pete added, "And he was generous." Came to class with pockets full of fudge squares, passed them out like it was Halloween every day. Sam laughed. Except the time he left a batch in his locker over spring break, opened it, up afterward, and it was a melted ant-covered nightmare. Denise smiled. Still, fudge was sweet. He lived up to his name in every way. Sam drummed his fingers. Here's one you can't forget. The encyclopedia. That one made us all nod. Encyclopedia Eric. I said, he read everything. Knew everything. Or at least acted like it. Pete chuckled. Ask him the capital of any country, he'd spit it out. Ask him how long whales lived, he'd give you the exact number. Denise said, and he'd raise his hand in class so often the teachers had to pretend not to see him. Otherwise, no one else ever got to answer. Sam smirked. He once brought an encyclopedia to the beach. Who does that? I laughed. The best part is, half the time he was right. Half the time he was making it up. But he said it so confidently, we believed him. Encyclopedia Eric. The boy who could turn trivia into gospel. Pete sipped his coffee, eyes twinkling. I've got one. The magician. We all grinned. That was Kenny. Denise said he carried a deck of cards everywhere, constantly shuffling, always asking, pick a card. I added, even during math tests, he'd nudge you and whisper, is this your card? While you were trying to do fractions. Sam chuckled. His tricks were awful at first. You could see the card sticking out of his sleeve. But he kept at it. By senior year, he was actually good. Pete nodded. Didn't he make the principal's watch disappear once? Denise laughed. Yes, and forgot how to bring it back. Had to sneak into the office later to return it. We all howled with laughter. Kenny, the magician. He wasn't flawless, but he made every day feel like it had a trick up its sleeve. Sam leaned back and sighed happily. You know, the more names we remember, the more I realize we were all a little ridiculous. I nodded. That's the point of nicknames. Nobody gets called Gravy or Moon Boots because they're boring. Denise smiled. True. A nickname means you stood out, even if just for something silly. Pete chuckled. Or especially for something silly. We all sat for a moment sipping our coffee, just enjoying the glow of shared memory. The pile of names was growing, but I could feel there were plenty more waiting, like unopened boxes in the attic of our minds. Pete leaned forward, tapping the table with his finger. All right, here's one you can't forget. Toothpick. We all groaned and laughed at once. Toothpick, Tim, Denise said, shaking her head. That boy was never without one in his mouth. I nodded. Yeah, he chewed on toothpicks like other people chew gum, said it helped him look tough. Sam chuckled. He even showed up to prom with a toothpick, tuxedo, shiny, shoes, corsage on his date's wrist, and a toothpick dangling out of the corner of his mouth. Pete grinned. Remember when Mrs. Watson finally snapped and banned toothpicks from her classroom? She said it was a hazard. Tim tried to sneak them in taped to the inside of his notebook cover. We all laughed, picturing him pulling one out like it was contraband. Toothpick Tim, always chewing, always grinning. Denise clapped her hands lightly. Oh, what about Bubbles? I nearly spit my coffee. Oh, Bubbles, that was Linda, right? Denise nodded, smiling fondly. Yep, Linda. She loved bubble gum, blew the biggest bubbles I'd ever seen. Sam leaned forward. Bubbles once blew one so big it popped and stuck to her eyebrows. Took her half the day to peel it off. Pete added, and she didn't care. Just laughed, grabbed another stick, and kept going. I chuckled. Didn't she get detention once for blowing bubbles in history class? The teacher said, Linda, you'll never learn anything that way. She blew one the size of a softball in response. Bubbles? A name that fit her perfectly. light and cheerful. Sam rubbed his hands together. Here's one I know you remember. Sticks. We all nodded. Sticks was Andy, the skinniest kid in school. Pete explained he was nothing but arms and legs, looked like a scarecrow in sneakers. Denise chuckled. Whenever he wore shorts, his knees looked like they were knocking, I added. And he could eat more than anyone. Burgers, fries, milkshakes, didn't matter. Never gained a pound. Sam smirked. One time we stacked cafeteria trays to see how many he could eat off of. He cleared 5 trays. 5. And still asked if anyone wanted their roll. Pete laughed. We always said if a strong wind came through, Sticks would just blow away. Denise tapped her chin. All right, Radar. Remember him? That drew a round of chuckles. Radar was Jimmy, the kid who always knew everything before anyone else. I said, he had ears like satellite dishes. Could pick up gossip from 3 hallways away. Sam added, and somehow he always knew when the pop quiz was coming. He'd whisper, test today, and sure enough, there'd be a test. Pete shook his head. I never understood it. He wasn't exactly a genius, but he always had the inside scoop, like he had his own network of informants. Denise laughed. My mom used to call him the school radio station. You tuned in, and Radar gave you the news. Sam leaned back, a sly grin spreading across his face. How about Tank? Oh man, I said, laughing. Tank was big, just big. Pete nodded. He wasn't even that tall, but he was built like a bulldozer. Solid muscle. Denise chuckled. He'd walk down the hallway, and everyone just parted like the Red Sea. Sam grinned. One time in gym, he tried to play dodgeball. No one could hit him because the balls just bounced off. But when he threw one, man, it was like a cannonball. Knocked poor Kenny the magician clear off his feet, I added. Teachers loved him, though. Said he was gentle as a lamb, and he was. Just don't stand between Tank and the lunch line. Denise tilted her head thoughtfully. Speaking of the lunch line, do you remember napkins? We all burst out laughing. Napkins, Pete said. That was Charlie. I nodded. He always grabbed a mountain of napkins. Couldn't eat without a stack at least 6 inches high. Sam chuckled. Even if he was just eating an apple, he needed enough napkins to supply a small restaurant. Denise added, he said it was insurance. In case of spills. Trouble was, he spilled something almost every meal. Pete smirked. I once saw him drop an entire tray of spaghetti. He calmly pulled napkin after napkin from his pile and started blotting it up like he was cleaning a little coffee spill. Took half the period. I leaned forward. All right, I've got one. Pockets, Sam burst out laughing. Oh yes, Pockets Paul, Denise grinned. That boy had more things in his pockets than anyone I've ever met. Pete nodded. Marbles, yo-yos, rubber bands, trading cards, string, a flashlight once. I swear he carried a whole hardware store around. I chuckled. You'd ask him for something random, like, hey Paul, got a paperclip? And sure enough, he'd dig around and pull one out. Sam added, he could have been a traveling salesman at 14. Denise laughed. I remember a teacher asking him once, Paul, what on earth is in your pockets? He emptied them onto her desk. Took 3 minutes. She just stared at the pile and said, I don't even want to know why you need half this stuff. Pete sipped his coffee, eyes sparkling. You know who I just remembered? Whistle. We all laughed in recognition. Whistle Willie, Sam said. That kid was always whistling, walking down the hallway in class during basketball practice. Denise added, sometimes it was a tune, sometimes just random notes, but it never stopped. I said, he even whistled in detention once. The teacher made him sit in the hallway, and you could still hear him through the door. Pete grinned. The funny part was, he was really good at it. Could whistle whole songs perfectly in tune. Drove everyone crazy, but it was impressive. We sat back for a moment, letting the laughter settle. The list of names was growing long now, the table covered, with half-empty cups and plates as we talked and talked. Sam finally said, "You realize we could sit here all night and not get through them all." I smiled. "And that's exactly what makes this fun." Pete raised his cup. "To nicknames, proof that even the silliest things stick with you for life." We all lifted our cups in a little toast, warm smiles, a little wistful, but mostly happy. Pete tapped his temple. "I've got another one rattling around up here. Slinky." Denise chuckled right away. "Oh, Slinky, that was Marjorie." I grinned, because she had that bounce when she walked. Sam added, "She always wore those springy sandals, too. You could hear her coming down the hall, the slappity-slap, bowing. Denise said. "And don't forget, she was the only one brave enough to try doing the splits during pep rally. Nearly didn't make it back up." Pete laughed. "Slinky Marjorie. She bounced through high school like gravity never applied to her." Sam leaned forward, eyes gleaming. "All right, how about Goose?" We all broke into chuckles. Goose was Greg, of course, I said. That boy had a laugh that sounded like an actual goose. Denise nodded, already laughing. "He'd get going, and the whole room would honk along with him." Pete smirked. "He once got kicked out of the library for laughing during silent reading. The librarian said she couldn't take the honking anymore." Sam added. "And don't forget, he'd sneak up behind people and actually goose them. That's half the reason he earned the nickname." I shook my head, smiling. Classic Goose, a laugh you could hear across the football field. Denise sipped her tea and raised a finger. "Oh, what about crayons?" Pete grinned. "That was Janet. She always had a box of crayons with her." Sam laughed. "Even in high school, everyone else had ballpoint pens, and Janet's homework looked like a rainbow." I added, "She once turned in a biology report written entirely in purple crayon. Teacher gave her an A-, said he deducted the minus for eye strain." Denise said, "And remember how she used to color in her notes? The rest of us had boring lined paper. Janet's notebook looked like an art project." Pete chuckled. "She said colors helped her remember things. Maybe she was onto something. She always got better grades than I did." I leaned back, thinking. "Here's one. Rusty." Sam nodded. "Rusty Rick. Always had a squeaky bike." Denise laughed. "That thing sounded like it was falling apart every time he rode past." Pete added, "He oiled it once. Just once. But he used cooking oil from the cafeteria. Smelled like French fries for a week." I said. "And he was proud of it. Said the squeak was his signature. Sound." Sam smirked. "I remember kids would hear that squeak coming and say, 'Here comes Rusty.' You could spot him by sound before you saw him." Pete clapped his hands. "Speaking of sounds, remember popcorn?" We all burst into laughter. "Oh yes," Denise said, shaking her head. "That was Debbie." Sam chuckled. "She laughed like popping popcorn. Quick little bursts, one after another." I added, "Once she got started, you couldn't stop her. It just kept popping until the whole room was laughing along." Pete grinned. "I sat next to her during algebra. The teacher would say something halfway funny, and there she'd go. Pop, 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 pop. Class was over." Denise said, "She had the happiest laugh, though. You couldn't be grumpy around popcorn." Sam rubbed his chin. "Here's one that's too good to skip. Boomerang." I laughed. "Oh, you mean Eddie? He never stayed gone." Pete nodded. "Every time he moved away, he'd be back within a year. New town, new job, didn't matter. Eddie always came back." Denise chuckled. "He left twice before graduation. His family moved, but sure enough, he boomeranged right back both times." I added, And even after school, same thing. Said he was going to make it big in Chicago. 3 months later, he was back at the diner saying the coffee tasted better here. Sam smirked. We always said he had an invisible rubber band tied to this town. Stretch it too far and snap. Back he came. Denise tapped the table. Okay, pickles. Pete immediately started laughing. Oh, that was Lenny. Sam nodded. He brought pickles for lunch, every day. I chuckled. Pickles, a sandwich, and a cookie, without fail. And if he forgot his pickles, he'd mope the rest of the day. Denise added, remember how he'd try to trade? He'd say, I'll swap you 1 cookie for 2 pickles. Nobody ever took the deal. Pete smirked. Well, except Goose. He'd honk, eat the pickles, and laugh himself silly. I leaned forward. All right, how about knots? Sam groaned. Oh, knots. That was Patty. She tied knots in everything. Denise smiled. Shoelaces, ribbons, strings. She could turn a piece of yarn into a puzzle in 30 seconds. Pete added, one time she tied my backpack zipper shut so tight I had to cut it open. I chuckled. She said knots were soothing. I said they were infuriating. Sam grinned. Didn't she try to make a friendship bracelet for Goose once? Poor guy wore it, but it was knotted so tight he nearly lost circulation. Pete lifted his cup again. Last one for now. Chalk. We all smiled. Chalk was Mike, of course. Denise said he was always covered in chalk dust from the blackboards. Sam nodded. He liked to hang around teachers after class, asking questions, erasing the board for them. He'd come out looking like a snowstorm hit him. I added, he even got chalk on his prom tux. I'll never forget that. Black tux, white streaks across the back, looked like a zebra. Pete chuckled. He never minded, though. Said it was the mark of a scholar. The table rocked with our laughter, wave after wave, as the names kept coming. Each one pulled another memory out of the attic, some silly, some surprisingly tender. Sam finally caught his breath. You know, every nickname we remember makes me wonder how many we've forgotten. Probably dozens more hiding up there. Denise smiled warmly. That's the fun part. They'll come back, just like Boomerang Eddie. We all chuckled at that, the sound drifting through the little diner, easy and unhurried. Pete leaned back, eyes twinkling. You guys remember Buttons? Denise almost spit her tea. Oh my gosh, yes, that was Claire. I laughed. She had buttons on everything, coats, bags, hats. She even sewed extra buttons on her jeans just for decoration. Sam grinned. She once entered the talent show and did a routine about buttons. Had the crowd cheering like she was a rock star. Denise added, didn't she collect them too? Whole shoebox full of buttons, said every button had a story. I chuckled. I borrowed a button once. She made me sign a contract. Pete laughed. Only Claire. Buttons forever. Sam tapped the table. Speaking of forever, remember clock? I grinned. That was Tony. He was never late, ever. Denise nodded. He carried a pocket watch like some old-timey railroad conductor. Pete added, he'd stand outside class 5 minutes early, pacing. We'd tease him, say he was wound tighter than his watch. I chuckled. And he always corrected teachers if they were even 30 seconds off. Sam smirked. You'd ask him the time, and he'd tell you to the second. If anyone deserved the nickname Clock, it was Tony. Denise leaned forward. How about milkshake? We all smiled. Sarah, I said. She worked at the drive-in and always smelled like vanilla. Pete laughed. She made the thickest milkshakes in town. You needed 2 straws just to breathe. Sam added, and remember how she could balance 3 trays at once. Shakes, burgers, fries, like a circus act. Denise chuckled. She once tripped, spilled shakes all over herself, and just laughed, said, Well, now I'm officially Milkshake. I grinned. Sweetest nickname anyone ever had. Pete scratched his chin. I've got one. Porcupine. Sam burst out laughing. That was Dave. His hair stuck out every which way. Denise nodded. No matter how much gel he used, it stood up like quills. I chuckled. And he always had that scowl, like he was daring you to touch it. Pete smirked. He once leaned back in his chair and got his hair stuck in the bulletin board. Took 3 kids to pull him free. Sam added, we told him he should charge admission. Porcupine Dave, the 8th wonder of the world. Denise tapped her spoon against her cup. All right, what about matches? Pete nodded. That was Joey. Always flicking matches around. I laughed. He thought he was James Dean. Rolled his sleeves up, match in his mouth, leaning on the lockers. Sam chuckled. Got detention more than anyone I knew. Not for fire, just for looking too cool with matches. Denise smiled. He gave one to me once. Said it was a lucky charm. I still have it in a box somewhere. Pete shook his head. Matches Joey. Probably still lighting up rooms with nothing but attitude. I leaned back, thinking. Here's one. Tuba. Sam immediately honked his best impression. We laughed until people at the next booth turned to stare. Denise said, that was Harold. Biggest instrument, smallest lungs. Pete chuckled. He could barely carry that thing. Looked like it was carrying him. I added, he tripped on the stairs once and rolled halfway down. Tuba and all. Sounded like an avalanche. Sam smirked. Band director said Harold was the only kid who could turn practice into slapstick comedy. Denise tilted her head. Okay. Who remembers Chili? Pete groaned. Oh man, that was George. I chuckled, because he brought chili to lunch in a thermos every day without fail. Sam nodded. And once he dropped the thermos and it exploded all over the cafeteria floor. Denise laughed. People slipped on beans for weeks. They had to put down extra mats. Pete smirked. We teased him, said he had chili in his veins instead of blood. He didn't even mind. I said, Chili George, a walking advertisement for home cooking. Sam snapped his fingers. Got one. Socks? Denise grinned. That was Mary. She wore wild socks every day. Pete added, stripes, polka dots, neon colors, never a matching pair. I laughed. She said matching socks were a prison for the ankles. Sam chuckled. She once wore Christmas socks in July. Said her feet didn't follow the calendar. Denise shook her head, smiling. She was ahead of her time. Nowadays, people pay good money for socks like that. Pete leaned in. Here's a classic. Whistle. I grinned. That was Frank. He could whistle louder than anyone. Denise nodded. He whistled through 2 fingers, sharp enough to stop traffic. Sam added. He was our unofficial referee. If kids were fighting on the playground, Whistle Frank shut it down. I chuckled. One time he got detention for whistling during a fire drill. Said he was helping the cause. Pete smirked. Probably still whistling his way through life. Denise clapped her hands lightly. We can't forget spaghetti. I groaned, already laughing. Oh, that was Tommy. Skinniest legs you ever saw. Sam nodded. And he always had spaghetti sauce on his shirt. Pete added, didn't matter what he ate. He could be having toast. Somehow he got spaghetti stains. Denise chuckled. He leaned over his plate so far, his tie once dipped into the pasta. Whole thing came out red. I said, Spaghetti Tommy, a walking commercial for stain remover. The laughter just kept circling the table, warm and steady, like a campfire no one wanted to leave. Every new nickname pulled up another round of chuckles, and the more we remembered, the more we realized how those little names had stitched themselves into the fabric of our younger years. Sam finally leaned back, eyes shining. You know, if we keep this up, we're going to need a notebook, a big one. Pete grinned. Don't tempt me. I'll start one right here. Call it The Great Book of Ridiculous Names. Denise smiled softly. I like that. It's not just silly, it's us, our history. We all fell quiet for a moment, letting the thought settle like a blanket. Then I chuckled. Well, let's not get too sentimental. We've still got 100 more to dig up. And just like that, the laughter rolled on again. Pete scratched his head. You guys remember cabbage? Denise snorted. Oh, poor Linda, I grinned. She got that name because she brought cabbage rolls in her lunchbox every single Tuesday. Sam chuckled, and the smell would fill the whole cafeteria. You could find Linda without even looking. Pete added, She didn't mind, though. She said, Hey, cabbage never lets you down. I laughed. I traded her once for half a cabbage roll. It was so good I almost proposed. Denise leaned back. Here's one. Crayons. Pete slapped the table. Yes, that was Becky. I nodded. She carried a box of crayons everywhere, like it was part of her soul. Sam grinned. She'd color on anything. Notebooks, margins of textbooks, the desks, her shoes. Teachers gave up. Denise chuckled. She even sharpened them down to tiny nubs and kept them in a little jar. Said, Every crayon deserves a full life. I smiled. That's Becky. Still see her in my head with rainbow fingers. Bada sweet wheat. Sam raised his finger. All right, what about radio? Pete laughed. Oh man, that was Carl. He never stopped talking. Denise nodded. And he knew every sports score, every chart-topping song, every headline. I chuckled. He'd walk into homeroom and start broadcasting like it was the evening news. Good morning, folks. Today's lunch menu is mystery meat and mashed potatoes. Sam smirked. If a teacher was absent, he'd do play-by-play commentary of substitute teachers. Cracked us up every time. Pete grinned. We called him Radio because he was tuned in 24/7. Denise tapped her chin. Speaking of tuned in, who remembers Owl? I smiled. That was Janice, always awake at night, never in the morning. Sam nodded. She'd shuffle into first period half asleep, sunglasses on, like a rock star who hadn't gone to bed yet. Pete chuckled. But after dark, she came alive. She'd sit on her porch, reading books by a lamp until midnight. I added, she once fell asleep during a test and still managed to get an A. The teacher said it was supernatural. Denise laughed softly. Owl Janice. She made nocturnal look classy. Sam slapped his knee. Got one. Marbles. Pete laughed. Oh, that was Henry. Collected marbles like they were treasure. Denise nodded. He had bags and bags of them, swirly ones, cat's eyes, steelies. He knew all the names. I chuckled. He once dropped a whole jar in the hallway. You've never seen chaos until you've seen 30 kids sliding across the floor on marbles. Sam smirked. We teased him that he'd lose his marbles one day. He said, I've got plenty more. Pete grinned. And he did. Enough to start a marble empire. Denise tapped her spoon again. Here's a sweet one. Sunshine. I smiled. That was Donna, always smiling, always. Sam nodded. She could brighten a whole room just by walking in. Pete added, even teachers couldn't stay mad at her. She'd beam at them and they'd forget why they were angry. I chuckled. She once got caught skipping class, and instead of detention, the principal thanked her for her sunny attitude. Denise sighed. Some people just glow like that. Sunshine Donna, one of a kind. Pete leaned forward. Remember Pickles? I laughed instantly. Oh yes, that was Larry. Sam nodded. He loved Pickles more than life itself. Carried a jar in his locker. Denise smirked. He'd crunch them in class so loud you could hear it across the room. I chuckled. One time he spilled pickle juice in his backpack. Smelled like a deli for the rest of the semester. Pete shook his head. We'd ask him what he wanted for his birthday. He'd say, "Pickles, always pickles." Sam rubbed his chin. "You guys remember glue?" Denise burst out laughing. "Oh, Joey, he stuck to people, didn't he?" I grinned. He always had glue on his hands from art class. No idea how. It was like his natural state. Pete added, he'd peel it off and collect the dried bits like trophies. Said it was his artistic skin. Sam chuckled. We called him Glue not just for the mess, but because he clung to his friends. Loyal as they come. Denise smiled. Good old Glue, Joey. I leaned back thinking. Here's one. Puddles. Pete laughed. Oh my gosh, that was Nancy. Sam nodded. Every time it rained, she found the biggest puddle and jumped right in. Denise grinned. She ruined more shoes than anyone I've ever met. I chuckled. And she'd come to class with wet socks, laughing like it was the best thing that ever happened. Pete smirked. Teachers gave up trying to stop her, said it was her personal hobby. Sam added, if Joy had a nickname, it'd be Puddles Nancy. Denise leaned forward, eyes sparkling. All right, who remembers popcorn? I burst out laughing. That was Richie. He ate popcorn like it was a food group. Pete nodded. Every Friday he'd sneak in a bag from the movie theater. Sam smirked. And he tossed it in the air, trying to catch it in his mouth. Half the time it landed on the floor. Denise chuckled. He once asked the cafeteria to serve popcorn instead of salad, said it had more nutrients. I grinned. Popcorn Richie. Probably still munching away somewhere. Pete tapped his finger on the table. Here's one. Bubbles. Sam laughed. That was Tina, always blowing bubble gum. Denise nodded. She could blow bubbles bigger than her whole head. I chuckled. Once it popped and covered her glasses. She had to cut her way out with scissors. Pete grinned. She'd snap her gum in class until the teacher begged her to stop. Never did. Sam smirked. Bubbles Tina. Living proof that chewing gum is an art form. The laughter rolled around the table like a wave that wouldn't quit. Each nickname pulled us deeper into the past, into the hallways and cafeterias and ball fields we hadn't walked in decades. Pete leaned back, catching his breath. You realize we could do this all night? Denise smiled. All night, all week, all year. We've got a whole world of names still waiting. Sam lifted his cup in a mock toast. To the nicknames, silly, sweet, ridiculous, but ours. We all raised our cups, grinning like kids again. I thought quietly, as the clink of mugs settled into the air, that maybe we weren't just remembering names. Maybe we were remembering the best parts of ourselves, too. Sam rubbed his hands together like he was warming them on the fire of memory. You folks remember Buttons? Denise burst out laughing before he even finished. Oh yes, Jenny. Always sewing something. Pete nodded. She had a whole tin of buttons. Big ones, small ones, shiny wooden, some shaped like flowers. She collected them like treasure. I chuckled. She once sewed 20 buttons on her jacket just for fun. It looked like armor. Denise added. She'd give away buttons too, like little gifts. Say, here, you look like a yellow button kind of person. Pete shook his head. The day her tin spilled in homeroom, it was like marbles all over again. We spent half the class chasing buttons across the floor. Sam grinned. Buttons, Jenny. Probably still stitching the world together somewhere. I leaned forward, elbows on the table. Here's one for you. Pencils. Denise smiled. That was Greg. Carried at least 10 sharpened pencils everywhere. Pete laughed. And sharpened them down to stubs. He couldn't stand a dull point. Sam smirked. He'd sharpen a pencil until it looked like a toothpick. then sharpen another. I chuckled. Teachers would groan when he got up because you knew the sharpener would grind for 10 minutes straight. Denise shook her head. We once timed him. 20 pencils sharpened before the bell even rang. Pete leaned back, grinning. Pencils, Greg. If anyone became a draftsman or engineer, it'd be him. Sam's eyes lit up suddenly. Hey, what about banana? Pete nearly spit his coffee. Oh man, that was Martin. Denise nodded. He brought a banana to school every day, like clockwork. I laughed. And if he forgot, he'd panic, like his whole system was broken. Sam smirked. Remember how he used to eat them dramatically? Peel halfway down, hold it up like a microphone, then take a slow bite. Pete chuckled. He even signed someone's yearbook with a doodle of a banana. I grinned. Banana Martin. Proof you could build a whole identity on fruit. Denise tapped the table gently. Here's one that makes me smile. Pebbles. Pete tilted his head. Oh yeah, that was Carrie. Sam nodded. She had a habit of picking up little stones everywhere she went. I smiled. She'd line them up on her desk, smooth ones, colorful ones. Each had a story. Denise added, she gave me one once, said it was a thinking stone. I kept it for years. Pete chuckled. When she tripped once, her pocket spilled a pile of rocks onto the gym floor. Sounded like hail. I laughed softly. Pebbles, Carrie? She taught us that even small things can be treasures. Sam snapped his fingers. Oh, whistle. Denise smirked. That was Tom, couldn't stop whistling. Pete nodded. He whistled in class, in the hallways, even in detention. I chuckled. And he could do it through his teeth, high, low, like a bird. Sam grinned. Teachers tried to shush him, but the second they turned around, tweet. There it was again. Denise shook her head. He once whistled the Star-Spangled Banner during a fire drill, got a standing ovation. Pete laughed. Whistle Tom. He was his own marching band. I leaned back, savoring the memory. Here's a funny one. Napkin. Pete slapped his knee. Oh man, Rachel. Sam chuckled. She always had napkins stuffed in her bag, pockets too. Denise nodded. She'd pull out a napkin for anything. Spills, sneezes, tears, even doodling. I smiled. She saved me once when I spilled soda all over my notes, handed me half a dozen napkins without blinking. Pete smirked. We teased her she was single-handedly supporting the paper industry. Sam added, Napkin Rachel. Always prepared. Denise tilted her head thoughtfully. Do you remember chalk? I laughed. Yes, that was Eddie. Always covered in chalk dust. Pete nodded. He loved writing on the blackboard, even when it wasn't his turn. Sam smirked. He'd volunteer to solve a problem just so he could scribble with chalk. His hands were permanently white. Denise chuckled. He once clapped the eraser so hard, he looked like a snowman. I grinned. Chalk Eddie. If you ever needed a diagram, he was your guy. Pete's eyes twinkled. Here's one. Piano. Sam smiled. Of course, Susan, always practicing in the auditorium. Denise nodded. You could hear her scales echoing down the hall. It was like a soundtrack to our afternoons. I chuckled. And when she got nervous, she'd tap imaginary piano keys on her desk. Looked like she was typing in midair. Pete smirked. She once played Happy Birthday on the cafeteria table with spoons. Whole room sang along. Sam grinned. Piano Susan, probably performing in some concert hall now. Denise leaned forward. All right, I've got one. Spider. Pete made a face. Oh, that was Mark. Always climbing on things. I chuckled. He'd scale the fence behind the gym like it was nothing. Sam nodded. He'd climb trees during recess, rooftops during lunch, even the basketball hoop once. Denise grinned. Teachers couldn't keep him on the ground. He'd just grin and say, "Spiders don't walk." Pete shook his head. "Spider Mark, probably working construction somewhere, climbing steel beams." Sam raised his cup. "Last one for this round. Biscuit." I laughed. "Oh yes, Kathy brought biscuits in a tin every Monday." Denise nodded. Her mom baked them fresh, fluffy, warm, perfect. Pete smirked. "She'd hand them out like currency. Trade a biscuit for homework answers, a pencil, even a seat." I chuckled. "She once charged interest. 2 biscuits borrowed meant 3 biscuits owed back." Sam grinned. "Biscuit Kathy. Smelled like butter and flour everywhere she went." The table shook with laughter again, our bellies sore from the sheer joy of it. Pete wiped his eyes. "We're not just remembering nicknames, we're remembering a whole town of characters." Denise nodded slowly. And every name, silly or sweet, was a doorway back in time. I leaned back, voice soft but warm. "Feels like we're weaving a quilt. Each nickname is a patch, stitched together with laughter. And when you look at the whole thing, you see us. Young, ridiculous, and alive." Sam lifted his mug again, solemn but smiling. "To the quilt." We clinked cups, and for a moment the room felt timeless. Sam leaned back in his chair and tapped his chin like he was unlocking a vault. "All right, here's a good one. Socks." Pete burst out laughing. "Oh yeah, that was Leon. Always mismatched socks." Denise giggled. "He'd wear one red, one blue, or stripes on one foot, polka dots on the other." I chuckled. "He claimed it was good luck. Said the socks had to argue with each other so his day would stay balanced." Sam grinned. "Once he wore Christmas socks in July." With sandals, Pete shook his head. "That poor gym teacher. Made him run laps just for the sight of it." Denise added softly, "Funny thing though, everyone knew him by his ankles. You didn't even have to see his face. Just glance down and say, 'Oh, that's Socks Leon.'" I leaned forward, grinning. "Remember Boomer?" Pete slapped the table. "Yes, Charlie. He had that laugh. You could hear it 3 classrooms away." Sam nodded. "And when he sneezed, good grief, it rattled the windows." Denise chuckled. "He scared a substitute teacher once. Sneezed so loud the poor woman nearly fell out of her chair." I smiled. But he was the gentlest soul. Boomer Charlie. Big voice, soft heart. Denise tapped her spoon against her mug. "Here's a favorite, minty." Pete grinned. "Oh yeah, Sharon. She was obsessed with chewing gum." Sam smirked. "Always had a pack of spearmint, passed it around like communion." I chuckled. "She could blow bubbles the size of dinner plates, popped one in the middle of math class and everyone jumped." Denise shook her head. "She even handed gum to teachers. Imagine that. A kid offering gum to a grown-up." Pete laughed. "Minty Sharon. Her locker probably smelled like a candy store." Sam pointed a finger in the air. "All right, this one's too good. Umbrella." Pete smiled. "That was Joyce. Carried an umbrella everywhere, rain or shine." Denise nodded. "She was paranoid about sudden showers." I chuckled. "Or maybe she just liked the drama of twirling it." Sam grinned. "She once opened it in the cafeteria just to prove it wasn't bad luck. Knocked over 2 trays." Pete laughed. "Umbrella Joyce, a walking weather forecast." Denise leaned closer, eyes sparkling. "How about pickles?" Pete groaned. "Oh man, that was Andy." I chuckled. "Lunchbox always had a jar of pickles in it. Always." Sam smirked. "He'd snack on them during algebra. Whole room smelled like vinegar." Denise grinned. "And he claimed pickles made him smarter. Said his brain ran on brine." Pete shook his head. "Pickles Andy. I still can't eat one without thinking of him." I raised a finger. "All right, feathers." Denise laughed instantly. That was Lila. She wore feathers in her hair before it was trendy. Sam nodded. Sometimes bright ones, sometimes just plain white. Looked like she'd been through a pillow fight. Pete smirked. She even glued a feather to her notebook, called it her lucky charm. I chuckled. She once lost one in the middle of a spelling bee, floated right down onto the judge's lap. Denise shook her head, smiling. Feathers, Lila. She made the world a little more colorful. Sam drummed his fingers on the table. Here's one. Dice. Pete grinned. That was Frank. Carried dice in his pocket at all times. I chuckled. He'd roll them on his desk before every quiz, like he was gambling with the universe. Denise smiled. Teachers hated it, said it wasn't proper, but he said, "Hey, math is numbers, right?" Sam smirked. He once rolled double sixes before a surprise test, swore it was fate. Pete nodded. Dice Frank, always letting chance decide. Denise raised her eyebrows. Do you remember stickers? I smiled. Of course. Beth covered everything with stickers. Pete laughed. Her notebooks, her locker, even her shoes. You couldn't see the original surface anymore. Sam chuckled. She once put a smiley face sticker on the principal's chair. He sat on it and walked around all day with a grin on his pants. Denise wiped a tear from her eye. Stickers, Beth. She turned the whole school into an art project. Pete leaned forward now, clearly enjoying himself. Here's one. Candles. Sam squinted. Candles? Oh yes, that was Mary. I nodded. She loved birthdays, always sneaking candles onto people's desserts. Denise chuckled. Even if it wasn't their birthday, she just liked making wishes. Pete smirked. She once stuck a candle in a meatloaf at lunch. Whole table sang happy birthday to nobody. I laughed softly. Candles, Mary, the girl who wanted every day to be a celebration. Sam rubbed his hands together again. How about tuba? Denise burst out laughing. Gregory, band kid. That giant instrument was bigger than him. Pete nodded. You'd see him walking home with it, wobbling side to side like he was carrying a battleship. I chuckled. He once tried to squeeze through a doorway and got stuck. Had to back out. Sam grinned. But when he played, you felt it in your chest. Tuba Gregory. He gave our pep rallies some real thunder. I leaned back, grinning. All right, sunburn. Pete laughed instantly. Robbie, pale as milk, turned lobster red every summer. Denise nodded. He'd forget sunscreen every time. By June, he looked like a cooked crab. Sam smirked. He once fell asleep at the beach with a comic book on his chest, walked around with a Superman-shaped tan. I chuckled. Sunburn Robbie. Human weather report for UV levels. Denise tapped the table thoughtfully. Do you remember Train, the one who made sound effects? Pete slapped his thigh. Yes, David. He'd chew under his breath during class. Sam laughed. He could mimic a whistle perfectly. Once got mistaken for the real train passing town. I chuckled. He even pulled imaginary breaks with his arm. Whole cafeteria joined in once, shouting choo-choo as he walked by. Denise shook her head, smiling. Train David made every hallway feel like a station. The laughter swelled again, warm and easy. Cups refilled, plates of pie nearly gone, but the stories kept flowing like we'd tapped an endless well. Pete leaned back, eyes twinkling. You realize we've named half the town already, Sam grinned. And yet, I bet we're only halfway through the list. I smiled, letting the words settle. Halfway through the nicknames, but all the way back in time. Pete set his fork down at last, the plate a battlefield of pie crumbs and melted ice cream. He leaned back with a sigh. You know, if somebody had told me back then that 30 years later we'd still be talking about socks and pickles and umbrella Joyce. He chuckled. I'd have called them crazy. Sam nodded slowly, smiling in that quiet way. Back then, I thought those nicknames were just throwaway jokes. A way to get through math class without losing our minds. But here we are. And somehow, they stuck harder than some people's actual names. Denise folded her hands. Isn't that something? Those little silly tags we gave each other in hallways. They turned into souvenirs. You carry them with you, whether you mean to or not. I found myself staring at the empty coffee cup in front of me. It was the same mug I'd been nursing for 2 hours, but suddenly it felt heavier with memory. Yeah, I said softly. It's funny. Some people fade. Teachers, lessons, the stuff we thought was so important. But those nicknames, somehow they're what survives. There was a pause at the table. Not uncomfortable. More like the silence that settles when a record slows down and the song you've been humming all along lands on its final note. Pete broke it, of course, with a grin. Well, I suppose it could have been worse. Imagine being remembered for something truly terrible. Like fart machine. We all cracked up again. The serious moment couldn't resist a last bit of silliness. Denise was laughing so hard she had to dab her eyes. Sam raised his glass. To the nicknames, to the ridiculous, embarrassing, inexplicable little names that outlived our textbooks and our report cards. Glasses clinked. Mine wobbled a little in my hand, but I caught it just in time. I smiled at them all. You know, if I had one wish, it'd be this, that somewhere out there, Socks and Minty and Tuba and Sunburn, they're raising their own glasses tonight. Maybe at a different table in a different town. And maybe, just maybe, they're remembering us too. The group grew quiet again. Not heavy. Just that soft kind of quiet that says the night's getting old and the memories are putting their coats on, ready to go home with you. Pete cleared his throat. Well, I think we just about wore this list out. Unless somebody's got a hidden nickname they've been saving for the grand finale. Denise chuckled. If I think of one more, I'll be shouting it in my dreams. Sam stretched his arms with a groan. Guess that's the sign we're winding down. And in that gentle way, Act 2 closed, the laughter still warm in our chests, the names still glowing in the air like fireflies that hadn't quite flown away yet. And so, as the sun leaned lower and the cafe staff began stacking chairs, we were still there, piecing together half-forgotten nicknames like detectives working a very unserious case. Some we remembered instantly, some we invented all over again, and a few, well, they stayed lost to the mysterious fog of memory. But the laughter, that stayed sharp. Sharper than any test we ever took, any grade we ever earned. It turns out, the real nickname we never forgot was friendship itself. I walked home with a lighter step, humming a tune I didn't realize I still knew. Because for one afternoon, we weren't grown-ups juggling bills and schedules. We were just kids again, with stories, laughter, and nicknames that may or may not have been real, but were absolutely ours. Thank you for spending this time with me. If this story made you smile, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your own favorite old school nickname in the comments. I'd love to hear them.